What's up, skeptics? I'm your host, Zoe McDaniel, and you're listening to Professional Skepticism. You don't have to look at that. I was just doing that for the intro.
Okay.
So today I have a special guest with me. I have Jason Chin. Is it okay that I said your name?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Tell the people your pronouns and your big three. Well, you don't know your big three. Tell them your star sign.
Yeah. So I'm he, him, and I'm a Leo with an Aquarius rising. Moon?
Moon?
Moon.
We don't know the rising. We just know the moon. So that's okay. Today we're going to talk about whether or not psychedelics are actually healing. Do you have anything you want to add to that? That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. That's just a topic I've always been fascinated with. I don't know. I've had mental health issues for much of my life, and I explored psychedelics to work with them. So
I'm curious to hear about your experience, I think, before I talk about like the scientific stuff that I found, because I just want to like open it up with that, and then I can bring up like some of the facts that I found.
yeah, like share my experiences like right now.
Sure.
Yeah. I was pretty like shy and introverted when I was young, and I feel like that led to a lot of different like somatic and like mental issues. Like I had asthma growing up because it was hard to speak, so I would like clench a lot of like words almost very like literally in my lungs.
That's a really interesting interpretation of that.
Yeah, and I'd like stutter a lot in front of people, and I'd have a lot of anxiety. I'd get super depressed during the winter, and yeah, in college was it no I graduated college, I had this period where I was doing like MDMA, psychedelics, and shrooms with some friends.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely had an impact on my life. Should I keep going? I don't want to like share the entire narrative right away. I don't know.
Okay, no, you're good. That's fine.
Yeah.
I think I want to start off by saying like my stance on it, maybe, and then you can share your stance on it. So I feel like I think shrooms. I'm one of those people that's like shrooms are medicine. I definitely think shrooms can be medicinal. I think with any medication though, you can overdo it. Like there is such thing as overdosing on just things that are like healing in general. So I think that you can overdo it, but I think that shrooms are medicinal. I have mixed feelings about acid, LSD, because it's man-made, and like obviously there are things that are man-made that are healing, like penicillin, amoxicillin, stuff like that, which I'm actually allergic to, so I don't know why I gave those as examples. But so LSD is a weird one for me because I feel like I don't know. I think it's one that's like easily abused. I could be wrong. I don't know if there's necessarily like a healing ceremony that people use LSD with, where they do with like shrooms and ayahuasca and stuff like that, which I also think is healing. I feel like for me, anything that's like a powder, like cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, stuff like that, I've heard people say that that can be healing. I know ketamine can actually, it's the only one, which I found in my notes, it's the only one that is actually FDA approved for like depression treatment and stuff like that. But I just feel like those aren't, in my opinion, necessarily healing. But things like ayahuasca and like things like that, I think can be. What do you think?
You know, I think they're fun. Yeah, you know, I wanted to be part of this podcast today. I'm a bit shy with my perspectives on these substances, but I think this is a good space to explore something I'm shy about.
Absolutely. And you're a skeptic.
Yeah. You know, I shared a lot of like mental and somatic health issues. I said like depression, anxiety, asthma. I feel like I can confidently say that I've pretty much fixed a lot of these aspects of myself. A lot of people I meet, they would say that I don't seem like an anxious person. I seem pretty social.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, I seem positive. That's something that I receive quite often. And I would say that uh my my journey to end those things ended up having very little to do with psychedelics.
But okay, so something that I'm curious about is like, do you think that because you did psychedelics in general, that led you down a pathway that would make it easier for you? Like maybe you weren't actively sitting like, oh, I'm going to take these shrooms so that it helps me overcome these problems. Like you're setting an intention before the trip. But like maybe just because you had taken shrooms or whatever and it opened up a part of your mind that wouldn't have otherwise been open, like maybe it made it easier for you to learn skills later on that helped you with those problems.
Gosh, that's like a big question. Um, I don't know, can I share? I don't know how much I should go into this. Like, how long do we have for this podcast?
I do about anywhere from 45 to an hour and a half. Or it could be shorter, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
You can go in as much detail as you want, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I had one MDMA experience, and that was my first try at rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And on that MDMA experience, I knew what I wanted out of a sober life.
Okay, so you're like rolling balls and you're like, I want a solid sober life now.
Well, I was like, I want to be happier,
Okay, because it made you happier.
Yeah. But then I also said to myself, well, I mean, you can't be rolling all the time, you know? Yeah, no, you can't. And so I just went online and I started talking to people on Reddit. I was like, well, how do I be happier without relying on MDMA?
Right. That's interesting.
And I would say that was the only psychedelic experience, if you count MDMA, that was the only psychedelic experience that really altered my path.
Yeah, I guess you could put that under, I don't know if it's necessarily psychedelic, but in that same kind of mind-altering category. I definitely had like a run with MDMA and experienced some of those same things. Like one of my boyfriends that I was with for almost 3 years and we lived together, like the first time we told each other we loved each other, we were rolling at like an EDM show, and it was like one of those things that like actually solidified our connection. So I definitely get that. And I think MDMA is one that they are trying to get FDA approved to be able to be used as a treatment, but it's one of those things that it's not like, you're not going to just take like if you were going to go to a festival and just pop some Molly versus like the doses they're going to give you in a administered treatment, it would be a different experience. But okay, very interesting. I feel like I had another question that I lost. Let me see. Yeah, I didn't even get that much about MDMA and ketamine. I just put must be administered by a doctor. Ketamine has FDA approval.
Yeah, I mean, and on the topic of LSD and shrooms, I've had a lot of fun experiences on those drugs. But in retrospect, I feel like the self I discovered on those drugs always like kind of disappeared very quickly, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean. I think my first psychedelic experience, I was 14, which I don't recommend at that age. It's just a very like malleable time. But I think because I had that experience, that was like one that was lasting. I remember when it was happening, I was like, I have to call my dad right now. Like, does he know that the universe is this way? Like, does he know love like this? Like, I was having that kind of like, oh my God, come to God kind of moment. And it changed me. Like from, obviously, because I was a child. So I was like, it was my 14th birthday, did that and was changed and like went down a completely different pathway than I probably would have in my life. My gosh, I keep forgetting what I was going to say. What was I going to say? You said something that reminded me of something. What did you say a second ago?
I said that like the self I discover on LSD and shrooms typically disappears very quickly.
Yes, that's what it was. I feel like my more recent psychedelic experiences are like that, where like I'll take it and I'll be like, I'm going to take this and set this intention to like stop smoking cigarettes or like do this or this or this or have a spiritual experience and like meditate the whole time. And then like I feel very inspired. And then like the next day I'm just kind of like back to reality. Or almost just sad that it's not still that way.
Yeah, that's precisely what I have too. It's like um, I'll like discover this like burst of confidence because I know how creative I can be like, while I'm on LSD and shrooms because there's a lot of inhibitions that are gone. But then when I'm back to sober life, those inhibitions are back. And I'm just super disappointed, you
Yeah.
know?
I feel like I get a lot of inspiration when I'm on psychedelics as well, and I'm like, I'm gonna paint all these things, and then when it's time to like paint them, it doesn't look the same, or like it doesn't come out the same way. I'm like, it's not right. Something's not right.
I was walking like through downtown Asheville, and there's this girl who had like this like metal stick, and she attached a string to it. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I was tripping acid, and I realized you can make music out of anything, so I decided I'd build an instrument right now. I was like, I totally know how, like, magical it must have felt on LSD. And it still was pretty cool, but it just came out looking very bizarre. You know, it's just like a girl plucking a string.
She was tripping in that moment.
She had, like, just finished the trip. I think she was on the come down.
I see.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So what is your conclusion? You don't think that it's healing?
I think that the ultimate healing thing is to like probably meditate and be around good people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you can do those things without substances. So in a way, they can be kind of distracting.
Oh, I think they definitely can be. I think everyone
Yeah.
knows somebody that's done way too much acid and they're just like not the same anymore. And it's like,
Yeah. That's something I wish I could say more often. But right now we're in this very um like a positive climate towards psychedelics. That's
Yeah.
not very self-reflective. So I always feel very shy about sharing this.
oh, don't be shy.
Yeah.
This is the perfect place to share
Yeah,
this.
but I mean I always feel like I'll be a buzzkill, you know what I mean? 'Cause
No, I'm all about it. I'm literally sober. So like I'm over here like having this conversation and I am literally the buzzkill. Like I'm sober. So I totally get it. And that's not to say, okay, I feel like I want to not retract, but go back to what I said where I was like, we all know someone who's taken so much acid that they feel like a different person after. That's kind of the point, you know, is to be like a different person. But I think there's like
Yeah.
a fine line between like doing enough to dissolve the ego and explore things that maybe you wouldn't have explored before versus just doing it all the time for fun. And I'm like, I feel like there becomes a point where it's just not even fun anymore. You're just doing it. But I think that's kind of the main thing that I saw in my research about psychedelics is that it's the ego dissolution that people have a hard time with. Like people will take acid and suddenly it like rots away all of the ego and all the societal norms, and then they can see things from a perspective that they probably wouldn't have been able to because they were living in a very specific lifestyle that taught them certain things. And so I think that's kind of like, because I agree. I think that there are a lot of things that like you can just do on your own. Like I don't think you need a substance to get to that point, but I think that it can be helpful if, you know, someone is so depressed and like maybe it'll open their mind up a little bit, then like why not? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that fits like, you know, that one experience I had with MDMA, even though I know that's not like LSD or shrooms, I feel like I was just a sad person, you know? I was like that kid listening to like the Smiths and Bright Eyes all the time.
I love the Smiths.
Yeah. And Radiohead. And I'm
I
like,
love the
the
Radiohead.
The Radioheads.
Yeah, the Radioheads.
Yeah. I think I just didn't know what happiness was until I tried it, you know?
How old
Yeah.
were you when you tried it?
I think I was 21, 22.
Okay, and did you
Yeah.
experience the Tuesday blues?
You know, I did not have any come down at all. I was just so uplifted. Actually, for a whole week, I had this afterglow. I was like writing poetry,
Yeah.
just sharing all these ideas with the people around me. And one of those poems got published.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, in this literary magazine in Beijing. It's kind of crazy to this day. Like almost objectively, it's like the best poem I've ever written.
I'd like to read it.
Yeah, I'll share it with you sometime.
You should read it on here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be hard to dig up.
Okay.
All
Well,
my poems just end up somewhere like bizarre.
share it with me and I'll like post it on Instagram or something like that if you're
Yeah.
comfortable with that.
Yeah,
I
of
mean, it was
course.
published, so I'm sure you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all.
That is interesting. I think the first few times that I had taken MDMA, and the first time I took it, I was 19, and it was like when I had discovered the rave EDM festival community, and that became like my lifestyle. That was like my personality. I was going to stuff like every weekend, and so I was like taking it all the time, and I honestly just was not even considering what it was doing to my brain. I didn't do any research about it at all, which I don't recommend. And the first times that I would take it, I would do it like, I knew that you were supposed to take it. You couldn't, or they recommended not doing it more than like once every 2 weeks, which is actually so not accurate. I think it's like once every 3 months to like not deplete your brain supply of serotonin or whatever. And so I was taking it like once every 2 weeks, and then sometimes even more. But in the beginning, I had that same effect where like I never had a come down. I never had the drop. I never had the Tuesday blues, which for people who don't know, the Tuesday blues is, the idea is that like you go out Saturday night, you take Molly, you have an amazing time. You know, Sunday, Monday go by, you're feeling fine. And then Tuesday it hits you. Like you have the like super depressy vibes and you're just really down. And I didn't have that. Like I never had drops, and I would always like see my friends like having drops and stuff. And then I had a very intense music festival weekend where I did like way too much, like way too much. Like I'm very thankful to like be okay today, like with how much I had taken. And I was just plummeted into this like serious depression. And that's actually when I started going to a therapist and seeing a psychiatrist, and like started addressing like, oh, I have a substance abuse problem, and now I am sober. And that was kind of like the start of that journey. But I think the initial interactions that I was having with it in the beginning are reflective of how it could actually help people. Because like I was also like a sad, depressy kind of person, like pretty much from like 13 or 14. Like I was just teen angst, you know, like it's just kind of normal. And so when I started taking it, I think I was like experimenting with it and like kind of lucking out in a way where it was making me feel good. And I was like, I loved my life. Like summer 2018, I was like, oh my gosh, like life is amazing. And a part of it was because of I was taking drugs, like, and that's why people take it. So I do think that it could be promising in like respect of, you know, a doctor administering it in the correct dosage and you're not just frying your brain. But it's also very serious. Like you can have serotonin syndrome and like all that crazy stuff. So maybe you just had the perfect dose.
Yeah, I guess. Well, you know, I had a great dose of everything. It was good music. I went to see a Flume concert, and the opener was Vince Staples. That was fun.
Okay, that sounds like it was really fun.
Yeah, it was with 4 people who were just very generous people, and we just became best friends after. And even though we were like doing drugs, sometimes we're also just good friends sober, you know?
Yeah.
There were people who like to read, who like to go on hikes, who like to cook. We liked all the same like TV shows, you know? We all loved Nathan For You. I don't know, it's just a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is like an absurdly wholesome answer, but I mean, like, the only real healing thing is friendship.
Stop. Anytime somebody says that, I think of, what is it, the It movie, the second one, where at the end they like defeat him with friendship. I'm like, shut the fuck up. I hate that.
I mean, that's why I'm almost like, I would never even say, you know, what would heal you is like MDMA, because that could be a chance where I could say, you know, what would heal you is if you like found the right people for you, you know? And so substances are weird because they can promise a lot of, let's say, enlightenment, but it can be very like take you down a weird path.
Oh, absolutely.
That's not the real path, you know?
Yeah, especially with stuff like Molly, ketamine, like those things are addictive. So if you start to rely on those for those kinds of experiences, and you're just going to be in this bad cycle. But I think just to play devil's advocate, because I don't really have like a solid answer on all of this, I feel like it really depends on the person. I think no one can know how a drug will interact with them until they take it. And that's just kind of how it is. But to play devil's advocate a little bit, like what you said about finding the right people, I think maybe people like to use substances for these experiences because they can't relate to people, or like they don't want other people to do that work for them, because sometimes it is internal work that you need to have. Like you can't rely on like a person to do that for you. But that might also just be my hyper independence that's like, I wouldn't allow anybody to get that close to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are just in circles, where it's just hard to get close, for whatever reason. Like maybe you're in a very poor neighborhood where everyone's just working too much all the time, so no one really has time to get together to love each other,
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, now I'm getting all like soft or
No, we
something.
can be soft.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a safe space. It's very pink in here. We can be soft.
Oh, hell yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, I get that. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, I was in a world growing up in Southern California where there wasn't a lot of genuine connection around me. And I think because of that, I showed traits of what you would call autism now, like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I guess substances can dig you out of that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think people often have those kinds of experiences. I can't tell you how many people have been like, oh, I was this way, and then I did shrooms, and now I'm this way. Like, suddenly I'm, like, more opened up. And I don't mean, like, this is probably going to sound... I don't think judgy is the right word, but it might sound weird to some people, and it's not always necessarily the case. But I feel like when I meet someone that's, like, a grown adult, and they told me that they haven't tried any sort of, like, psychedelic or mind-altering experience, I almost am like, that's weird.
It's like, how do I put it? It's unrealistic, if that makes sense.
It's unrealistic, and it's almost like, I think I took substances way too young. 14 was way too young for me to be playing with psychedelic things because I could have really broken myself. But like, I met someone recently who's close to 40, and they had never taken any sort of psychedelic, and I was like, that's crazy to me, because I just feel like there are some things that, like, I don't know if I can explain to people who haven't taken psychedelics. Like, I think some people don't understand certain... I mean, spirituality is a very broad concept and can encompass, like, so many different things, but I just feel like there are some concepts and ideas that people don't really relate to or understand. Like, when you take shrooms and suddenly you're like, everything is connected and everything is love and everything makes sense. And I feel like I haven't had, I mean, prior to that, but again, I was only 14, so maybe if I had just developed into a full-fledged adult before I decided to go and take psychedelics, I might have had an experience like that, but I never had an experience like that until I opened up my mind, or what is it that they say, cracked open your head or something with psychedelics. And honestly, like, I feel like I can tap into that space now through meditation, especially in group settings where you feel like you're tripping, because you can create those feelings without actually taking the substance. A lot of the, like, stuff is just things that are being, like, released in, like, chemical releases in your brain. So you can, like, have similar experiences that feel that way, but I just think sometimes it's like there's a divide that happens. It's like, oh, you haven't explored these parts of... You haven't had an ego death. You haven't tripped so hard that you thought you were dead. You know what I mean? Like, not everybody gets it.
Well, I think there are other things like drugs or like substances that can crack open your mind. I think like poetry can be that kind of experience. I started meditating. I mean, I said it was partly to do with MDMA, but it also had a lot to do with like Allen Ginsberg and a lot of like poets from the 50s and 60s who meditated.
Okay, what is that, the beatnik generation?
Yeah, that's the beat generation.
Got it. So what would you say their poetry is like that would get someone to that place?
Well, Allen Ginsberg will just like quote like the Lotus Sutra or the Diamond Sutra in his poems. Same with like he and his friends would just quote Buddhist scripture in his poems.
Oh, okay.
It would be very evident, and all the pictures you see of him and his friends like in like Indian style, doing mantras and like mudras and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There were all these things when I was growing up that would have led me to that place where you're just meditating with a lot of people, Like, I was always fascinated with, like, the architecture of temples and cathedrals. I was always obsessed with, like, poetry and music, too, It's like Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen or Jeff Buckley. So I mean, I'm always like sad a little bit when we say like substances are healing, because it feels like it just distracts us from these things, you know?
I feel like it's not a distraction though. I love this conversation. I love I just always love to point out things and be like, well, this is what I think.
Yeah.
I feel like it's definitely like, if anything, I don't think that it's all the substance is doing. I think the substance can be a catalyst, a tool to healing. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that like there's a lot of rhetoric and stuff now about that kind of tout substances as being the healing thing rather than like something that can help heal.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Like or do you just think, sorry, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, well, I mean, it's just like, I would go as far to say, like, I think people who say, okay, shrooms healed me, I think that's fairly true.
But like, what if it did?
I think if shrooms healed you, you wouldn't say that. You know, it's like the way that like the enlightened man is silent. So it's a very tricky thing.
Oh,
because
that's interesting.
I think if you were very healed, you would just say, oh, well, I liked Legos when I was 8, so now I like building things. That would just be what you say.
So what would you say about the shrooms? I took shrooms and now I like to heal myself.
I would say you're like Goldilocks with the 3 bears. I think you had like pours that was too hot, pours that was too cold. I don't think you have found the pours that was just right yet. Like, do you see the paradox that I'm kind of like illustrating?
Yeah, no, I definitely get that.
Yeah.
I don't think I follow the Goldilocks thing though.
Oh, it's just like you're not at the end of a journey.
Oh yeah,
But
I think that's a big thing right now. Like everybody's like healed. I'm healed. I'm like, no, like literally never.
yeah, literally never. Yeah, and so yeah, so I don't know what that means to say that shrooms are healing, because it's almost like a paradoxical thing.
I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where I was like, maybe you said that you've taken, Molly, shrooms, whatever, and you don't think that those are the things that have healed some of the things that you have healed. Because, like, okay, healing is an ongoing process, but I think that you can heal certain things. Like, you can come to a conclusion or, overcome an issue, and that you can say, like, okay, maybe I, like, healed this insecurity or I healed this thing. So you're saying, like, you healed certain things and you don't think it was because of psychedelics, but, oh, God, I lost my train of thought again.
It's a complicated topic.
It is such a complicated topic.
I feel like we're building a very complex case,
We are, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting so like tripped up, and I think that's kind of the thing. I think me losing my train of thought is almost like a metaphor for like what we're talking about right now. Oh my gosh, yeah, because the last psychedelic experience that I had like a brain broken moment where like I was talking to my friend and we were talking about like just God. We were just talking about God. And like, I don't even remember what he said, but he said something that like, we were like, it was almost like breaking the like fourth wall or whatever the saying is. Bless you.
That was a burp.
Whenever I have to burp, I'm like, into the microphone.
Okay.
You don't have to do that unless you want to.
Always burp extra loud, just to make it theatrical. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it was like one of those like, and that's the saying, right? Like when a TV show like acknowledges itself or something, like you're breaking the fourth wall. We had like one of those moments where like we were just talking about like, I don't even know what the fuck we were talking about because my brain like was like hard reset. Like it was just something that like I was not supposed to hear at that moment, I don't think. But I feel like that's also like an example of what's happening. Like I feel like I keep getting to this point where I'm like, that's a really good point. I'm going to make it. And then I lose it like as we're like talking about it. Because you're making really interesting points. I feel like, and your argument is very simple. It's interesting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But I guess those points are somewhere in the noggin,
They'll come back around. Just give me a minute.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, man. I mean, I'm someone who studies a lot of like philosophy and spirituality, both by the books and by life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I spent a lot of my life um practicing different religions, going to different countries, just traveling across America, talking to people, and yeah, that's why I've developed a certain perspective against, not against, that's strong, towards LSD and shrooms. I'll even do it, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
Why not?
yeah, exactly, right? Yeah.
Well, it's against the law, but
um, yeah, if someone said like, let's do shrooms a year from now, I'd like maybe agree to that. If it sounds like it'd be like let's say,
allegedly, hypothetically.
um, if it sounded like it'd be a good
A
experience,
wholesome experience.
if it sounded like it'd be a wholesome experience,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think, like, in general, people have a lot of misconceptions about psychedelics. And I think that, like, we put a lot of pressure on to it. And I don't know. I'm for like the legalization and the research of all of it and like the people trying to use it in healing practices and stuff because like why not? Like I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing once it starts to become like a habit or people like I know someone that did a ketamine treatment that should not. Well, I'm not a doctor, but like just knowing them I'm like I feel like you finessed your way into that ketamine treatment just because you wanted to like have ketamine.
mm,
But I think we forget how serious psychedelics are and then people just kind of take them like willy-nilly and like I mean I have friends that like are not sober and will rationalize that it's like okay that they're doing so many things because it's healing and I've like been there like I've been the person that was like I'm gonna like microdose shrooms all the time and whatever but I think it's kind of like a movement of people just trying to like be like it's okay and like normal to be using these substances all the time but I don't think it's necessarily like a healing thing for everybody that uses them just because you don't really know what you're getting into but I think the reason that people do say that like I could understand it as like a metaphor or something where you're like this is a holy thing like you don't need to be just casually doing this like if you're going to take acid if you're going to take shrooms if you're going to take DMT or whatever you need to approach it with like a very conscious state of being like you need to just I don't know I mean people take these as party drugs all the time but like I think it's something that needs to be handled with care is what I'm trying to say.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of funny. The last shrooms experience, I was like freaking out. I was like, oh no, what if I have a bad trip? And so I went to mass on a Monday, right before I tripped. So I went to church and I was like just like praying my ass off to God to make sure I have
Yeah.
a good trip. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, it's set in setting, right? Like you got to set your intention. I think that that's a smart way to handle it.
Yeah. But then how furiously I was praying, my priest was like, Jason's doing something. I know.
Did he say something to you?
No, he just looked at me. He's like, that kid's up to no good today.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah.
I don't-
Allegedly. Allegedly.
He was
Yeah.
allegedly up to something. No.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever really had like a. Sorry, Ziggy's bouncing around. Lay down. Ziggy,
Ziggy.
come here.
Oh, that's a boy. Good boy.
I don't think I've ever approached it with like a healing perspective necessarily. I think maybe more so recently, like in the last few experiences that I had, I tried to approach it with like a healing mindset, but I don't think I ever was the type to be like, I mean, I've like used incense to like cleanse my space and stuff like that. Dude, lay down. Thank you. But I know that there's like rituals that people, which we talked about rituals last time, but I know that people have like more specific rituals. Like Obviously set and setting should happen. I actually had an experience where I like took shrooms without like planning on it and was like in a very bad place, and I was like, it's gonna heal me, and I just like took them, and it was a really bad time. And my friend was like, did you take your set and setting? And I was like, no, I didn't like do any of that. And so after that moment, that was like 2 or 3 years ago, after that I like any experience I had after that, I made sure that I at least like mentally was like, okay, what do I want out of this? Like, am I just doing this for fun? Like, which is okay. I think if you do want to do it for fun, it's okay to just do it for fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way that could be more wholesome than that whole shrooms are healing, you know? Because, I mean, as long as you're having like a wholesome amount of fun, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're that kind of person who, like has a beer every once in a while with his friends, you know, and then he takes shrooms with that mindset to have fun, I think that could be a good time.
Yeah.
You know, especially because in a way, when you're having fun, you expect less from it. And you know what they say, like when you expect less, you receive more.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you some of these things that I found
Yeah.
online about studies that were about it. So something that I've always been super interested in is ayahuasca.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just think the whole process is incredibly interesting. Like, people just go to the Amazon and like stay there and have these ceremonies, and it's just, I think I'm just intrigued.
That was a burp again.
Yeah, so ayahuasca, and I have just like kind of what they are used to treat or heal, and then a little bit about them. So ayahuasca is supposedly good at healing generational and ancestral trauma and mood and personality disorders. And if you don't know what ayahuasca is, it's a hallucinogenic plant that's brewed into tea and used by indigenous people in South America, particularly Amazonia, for religious and medicinal purposes. And ayahuasca is, the active ingredient in it is DMT. Pretty sure.
Okay, I actually didn't know they were like tantamount to being the same experience.
So it's not the same experience, but it's, so ayahuasca is like the tea that you drink. And the active ingredient in it is DMT, and it lasts about, it's like a 5-hour experience. And then DMT is like just straight up DMT, and you like smoke it, and it's like a 15 to 20 minute experience. And like ayahuasca is incredibly intense. They're both incredibly intense, but in different ways. So it's like the same active ingredient, just kind of like, it's like, what's the other one I have on here? Peyote, mescaline, and San Pedro. Like, they're all, mescaline is like the active ingredient in all of that, but they all have different effects on you because they're like different forms of ingesting it, or like different plants with like different measurements of the active ingredient or whatever. Okay, so I have some stats for you guys here. Forbes magazine cites an academic article published in the scientific journal Nature, and they attempted to quantify the healing properties of ayahuasca. It was self-reported, though. I'm always skeptical of self-report studies because it's like the participants are reporting their experiences. But overall, it looks like ayahuasca reduces neuroticism and negative emotionality. And then this part, so are you familiar with like the ayahuasca ceremonies, how they work?
Yeah, no, I've just heard a lot of the same things that you shared. Like, people unearth a lot of very deep memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I've seen different experiences where people would say like they went and it was like a month-long thing where they like stayed with a shaman, and they would talk at the beginning and be like, this is what I want to work through. And the shaman would recommend like different plant medicinal herb stuff to like eat and ingest, teas, food, whatever, throughout like the month leading up to the ceremony as a way to like prepare them. And it's different like based on what you discuss with the shaman, and then you do the experience. And then I've seen different experiences where people were like, I just showed up and did ayahuasca, and there was a shaman there to like guide me through it. So I've seen varying things, but what's common in every experience is the throwing up. Like, you drink the ayahuasca and then you have like the awful throwing up like while you're starting to come up, which sounds really terrifying. Like, imagining. I've never done anything as insane like DMT. I've never done any sort of thing where like I wasn't consciously in my body. Like I haven't just been like seeing things that aren't there the way that like some of these more intense drugs are. So I'm just imagining like lifting off or whatever, blasting off, and I think that's what they say. Blasting off into like a DMT or ayahuasca experience, and then like your body's like physically throwing up. So there's like this very material, physical, grounded part of your body that's like having this primal reaction of like throwing up, but then you're like up here in this like galactic realm at the same time. But anyways, the throwing up is considered by shamans to hold healing properties. And I don't know what this means, but this was in the article. Some qualified evidence has been found to support this. So I guess you're like throwing up you're purging the stuff you don't want anymore. What do you think about that?
I would say something very similarly to what I said about LSD and shrooms. Okay, I've had people who tell me they want to do ayahuasca. I've had people who tell me that they have done it. I haven't met someone who's done it who's really taught me anything yet. To be quite honest.
Are they supposed to teach you?
Yeah.
What are they supposed to teach you?
Well, we're human beings. I think if they really went through a real spiritual experience, they'd have something to share. And that thing that they share would be very just palpable, you know? It would just be love. It would just be like a hug, you know? Yeah.
I guess so.
You know?
I think so. But I also feel like maybe they're like, you need to go have your own ayahuasca trip.
But I don't think that someone of love, and I'll use a spiritual term, grace, I don't think they would say that, you know? There's this like Buddhist parable where someone asks the Buddha, what is nirvana? And then the Buddha smiles and holds up a flower. I think they would just do something like that. And then we would all smile, you know?
What settings were these experiences in where you met these people that did? I don't think I've met anyone that's done ayahuasca that I'm aware of. If you have done it, let me know.
It's just throughout life, you know? Like going to parties, just being at a coffee shop. I think the last time someone talked about it was at, what's it called? Oh, shoot, I can't name the company.
That's okay.
This company in New York City was having a happy hour, and he had this like a software engineer talked about it, and he was actually a very depressing person.
Oh, well, some people have bad experiences on ayahuasca.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's like, if that's my personal experience, how could I believe, let's say, like statistical facts that say it's positive?
I don't know. Do you believe statistics in general? Maybe you're meeting all the people who had bad ayahuasca experiences.
Well, it's a very Buddhist tenet where, the ultimate reality is what goes through your eyes and your ears.
That is very interesting that you bring that up, because that is also what a lot of conspiracy theorists say. That's why people argue that the earth is flat. Because their eyes and ears show them that it's flat.
Oh.
So I could like flip that on its head real quick.
Yeah, but they also don't shut up. You know.
You got me there.
Yeah. Well, there is a strange meeting point of conspiracy theory and religion.
Yeah.
You know?
I think there's some truth to what that statement is that you said. Like, there is some truth to like, you need to see and hear things on your own sometimes to understand. But like, then I think people take it to their own extreme and they're like, do your own research. And that's where you get the conspiracy theorist side of it.
I would also say that, let's say Earth is flat, they're also not seeing or hearing the flatness.
Yeah.
So it's still in there.
But they think they are.
Yeah. See, they're still thinking. Yeah. Yeah. And that's...
At least they're thinking.
But thinking in the negative sense. You know what I mean? Where they're in their head, you know, they're not in the world with us, you know. Let's say, I don't know, in a clear space.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was such an interesting wraparound, because I have an episode about flat Earth, and I talked about like the mindset of conspiracy theorists and stuff. So when you said that, I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah.
But no, I do like that. I like that. Okay, so back to this study. So I wanted to point out some of the things that people experience, which kind of, I guess, go to like what you're saying maybe, but more of the physical stuff. So side effects included difficulty relating to people afterward, hypersensitivity, flashbacks, and recollections of adverse subjective experiences during the ceremony, which I'm not sure. I guess just maybe seeing things they didn't want to see, which I see a lot of in these articles. They're typically written by people that are for, not these the scientific ones, but like if you just like look up websites where you can like find a retreat to go do these kinds of things, they're typically like, you don't know what kind of experience you're going to get, so just be prepared for like whatever she has to show you, which a lot of drugs are referred to as she. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just referring to that. Distressing dreams, hallucinations, speech impairment, brain fog, difficulty concentrating on math and financial information, which I thought was funny. I was like, me too. And then it ultimately was like the positive side effects outweigh the negative. So this says, in addition to suggesting, and this is a quote, this part, in addition to suggesting ayahuasca's efficacy in treating mood and anxiety disorders, many other disorders may also be amenable to change, including personality disorders with a strong negative emotional core, such as borderline personality disorder, as well as antagonistic externalizing, involving aggression, rule-breaking, abuse, and criminality, and disinhibiting externalizing, involving impulsivity and substance misuse. Frequently have an emotional component, blah, blah, blah. They believe there is good empirical basis for utilizing ayahuasca transdiagnostically in the future. And then there was another 2018 article that like looked at the science of how ayahuasca interacts with the brain and like what parts of the brain, and they basically think that it can heal traumatic memories associated with like PTSD. And then also it said with other conditions where cellular memory is dysregulated, like cancer, diabetes, autoimmune and neurodegenerative pathologies, and substance addiction, which sorry. There's like, I just think it's something so funny about like a lot of these drugs that I have pulled up, drugs, plant medicine, herbs, things. I think people have a negative connotation to the word drug, so I don't want to necessarily call everything in here a drug, because like some of it is just naturally occurring things that we like put into our bodies that we react to, but I guess that is a drug. But a lot of them are like, oh, this will help with substance addiction. And I'm like, you're literally taking a substance.
Yeah, it's ironic.
And I have a whole thing about that here in a minute, but I don't know. I feel mixed about it. Because I'm like, well, if it can help people that have problems, like, I don't see why not. But then it's also just like, I feel like it could also cause problems as well. It's like you have to figure out the benefits and the drawbacks.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we've already seen in America, like, we already prescribe substances to help people with certain disorders, and with my own eyes and ears, you know, like with like, let's say like Xanax or Adderall, these were approached with a similar optimism,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that we currently have towards LSD, mescaline, ketamine. You know, it's the same kind of rhetoric you might have heard in the 90s or the 80s. But we saw the whole story, you know. I mean, these days, I never hear anyone, you know, who took Adderall or Vyvanse and they came up to me and smiled and held a flower, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like my measure, you know, for if you're like someone I'm just in love with spiritually.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we believe the rhetoric again, you know, when they promise that a different set of substances can improve our noggins.
I like the way you say that. And, you know, it's interesting because it goes back even further than that. Like, we used to take morphine and, like,
yeah! we...
like, it's the same thing.
In American, like, history, there is this... It repeats.
Yeah.
This cycle.
It's like, here, drink this whiskey and snort some cocaine and, like, you'll feel better. And it's like...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, at one point, Coke was supposed to be this, like, cure-all, what's the word, panacea.
Yeah.
When you look at it like that, it just seems like, yeah, we're in a cycle.
Yeah, and, like I have here, we're going to talk about the AA founder who did LSD.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. But I'm just gonna
I would
skip to
start
that.
now.
No, you're
I'm now
good.
very excited because I had this like all my neurons flashed. That guy, the AA founder who did LSD's not part of his program.
Okay, I did some research. Let's talk about it.
Okay.
So, acid has been claimed to help with PTSD, addiction, depression, OCD, and inflammation. And Bill Wilson. So, when people would be admitted to the hospital back in the 30s, I believe was when AA was founded, they would be given belladonna leaves as like a treatment that would help with delirium tremors. Let me see where I have that. So belladonna, which I didn't talk about in the last episode, but the Manson family was taking belladonna a lot too. It's a highly toxic hallucinogen. It's a natural like plant thing that is a similar feeling to LSD, but it's a little bit more. It's like having an actual poison experience versus like when you take LSD, you're like, wow, things are beautiful. This is like a human is like walking outside and they're like, that plant looks yummy, you want to eat this? And then they're like, ah, you know what I mean? Like how we found like shrooms, that's kind of how I imagine it. But it was supposedly, right here, it might provide some insight into delirium tremens. And that was like, I guess, why they were giving this to people. So they would go in, they'd be shaking, they'd be like, here, have this. And supposedly it would help with that. And so that was where Bill Wilson had his first like spiritual experience, I guess, on belladonna. And I can't remember what website I got this from. I'm going to post all my sources, don't worry. He like on that experience imagined what AA is. He was like, oh, other alcoholics helping other alcoholics, having spiritual experiences, calling each other, building this network, like always being there for each other. So he was like on belladonna, had this concept come to him. It's not what it says in the book. But yeah, so that was supposedly like where it started. And then he like, as everyone did back during this time, knew a guy who was experimenting with LSD. And at this point it wasn't illegal yet. I don't think I think it became illegal after it had been found out within the like wider AA program that Bill Wilson was taking LSD, and then it became illegal. And then people were like, well, people were upset anyways, because it's an abstinence only program. And when I was reading about this, somebody like, there was a doctor, I might have put it in here, but there was a doctor who was like, it's an abstinence-only program, but they smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. And I'm like, give them a break, man.
Yeah.
Like, come on, like, Jesus. Okay, what does this say? So in one study conducted in the late 50s, Humphrey Osmond was an early LSD researcher, and he was one of the people that decided to start trying to see how it could affect people who were alcoholics, to see if they could quit drinking. And it says after about a year, between 40 and 45% of the study group had continuously abstained from alcohol, which was an almost unheard of success rate at this time for alcohol treatments. And I feel like I hear this a lot. Like I was talking to someone recently and they were like, I don't want to smoke cigarettes anymore, so I'm going to take acid and set the intention that I'm going to stop smoking cigarettes. And I was like, I mean, I guess people do that. But I think that was kind of like, I wonder if this experiment was like a placebo effect kind of thing where they're like, oh, I'm going to take this acid and then never want to drink again. And then maybe it happened. But I don't know. I don't really know, because the alcoholism is like such a crazy illness, disease, whatever, that like, I don't know if like a placebo effect would work on an alcoholic. What else? Recent LSD studies suggest that the ego dissolution, like I mentioned earlier, occurs because it temporarily quells activity in the cerebral cortex, which is the area of the brain responsible for executive functioning and sense of self. So research suggests that ego death may be a crucial component of psychedelic drugs' antidepressant effects. So that ego death that maybe people wouldn't. I think like people could come around like maybe in a lifetime to a place where their ego is soft enough to where they can like figure these things out without substances, but the ego death that comes with LSD or it doesn't always have to result in ego death. Not everyone who takes acid is going to have an ego death, which if you're not familiar with ego death, it's like basically you just like lose all sense of self, all concept of like who you are and what you know, and like suddenly realize, I don't know, how would you explain ego death?
I don't know. I mean, I've never really had that experience on a psychedelic substance before, um, maybe you forget your name.
It's like everything you think you know about everything is just not.
Yeah.
It's like just a brain shatter moment of like, holy shit, it rocks you. It's like a reset.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. Sounds interesting, I guess.
It can be really scary. People come back from having ego death experiences and they aren't the same, which could be good and bad. Like I mentioned earlier, like it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but I think it can scare people really badly. But I don't think you necessarily need an ego death to make change or heal in your life. But I think the barrier that the ego has is dissolved by these drugs, and that's why it's like easier. People have, maybe the drug isn't healing, but taking the drug accelerates healing or learning or experiences that maybe you would have had normally, but you just make it happen quicker through the use of a substance, I think is like what I would take from this.
I think that's true. I think it's like, I think it's called a trip for a reason. It's almost like what you get from like if you actually took like a physical trip for like
I
a month.
like that.
You know, it's very similar. Yeah. Like you know, I shared with you, did I share? During COVID, I took like this cross country road trip for like
Yes.
half a year. You know, I drove from LA to New York and then to Athens, Georgia, back to LA. When I came back to LA, I was a very changed person, as if I'd done an acid trip.
Yeah. I had a recent oracle reading done, and I'm going to be traveling, like we've talked about, here in the spring, and I'm going to be gone for like 2 months. And the oracle reading was like, you are going to experience so much. Like, you're literally going to come back a different person in like all the best ways. Like, it's going to have like unlocked so much, and you're going to meet all these people and see all these things, and it's going to like level you up for the next chapter or season of your life or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, here we go. But I have had trips where that happened for me, where like I had like a really intense trip, and then afterwards I was like, whoa, I'm a different person. And that's not always the case, because I was taking drugs a lot more than I should have. And I think it loses its sparkle after a while. That's the name of the game. But yeah, I like that idea of like, it's a trip. You're literally taking a trip.
Yeah. And you have to be prepared for it. Like it's a trip.
Yes.
Yeah, gosh, that's one of those real medicines I would prescribe someone, you know, instead of LSD. I would just be like, you should just go somewhere, you know.
But that's a lot more time consuming and expensive than just getting like a $10 tab of acid.
It is. But I mean, like...
But if you can do it, you should do it.
Yeah, I mean, most medicines that are good are slow, you know. Most good things in life take a long time. You know, you don't want, let's say, you don't want you want the wine that's 2002. You don't want the wine that was bottled yesterday, you know?
That's kind of like how I feel about tattoos. Like, I keep getting ads for tattoo pre-application creams that like make it not painful.
Yeah.
And this this might be a silly example of that, but like I feel like a part of the experience of being a tattooed person is that the pain is a barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Like and also I think pain is like its own, like I could probably do a whole episode talking about like pain in the body and the mind and stuff, but like that's why a lot of tattooers get annoyed when like you come in and you don't have any tattoos and you're like, let me get some finger tats or like a face tat, because it's like it's like a club that you become a part of when you've sat for like 10 hours on a really long fucking tattoo and you sat through the pain and you experienced it, and like it's a whole thing, versus like nowadays it's like, let me just slap on this stuff and go get this big piece. It's just kind of like in a way disrespectful to the culture, which is not what we're talking about, but like not everything is like, it shouldn't be easy just to get your hands on everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It shouldn't be, I don't know, McDonald'sified.
Yeah, like on every street corner.
Yeah, but see, this is kind of helping me with my own perspective, because it's like, why would the healed man recommend the quick thing? The healed man usually recommends the slow thing.
Yeah.
See, that's kind of like a mindfuck.
That's so true, because
it's another paradox.
I am actively in a recovery program, and as I was like reading about the AA, because I had always heard about the founder taking LSD, and it's still within the sober community. Like, one of my sober friends told me about it, and I was like, what? And like, I was so curious about it, and it's still, a lot of people are touchy about it, because like, and even reading last night, I was like reading about this, and it was making me be like, I was like, do I need to be sober? You know what I mean? Which, like, I need to be sober. Like, I had a whole like spiritual experience that put me into this situation that was like, you need to be doing this spiritual practice every day, and it's more than just the physical sobriety. Like, but he basically, so like, I'm going back to that, like, he did the belladonna. Supposedly that's what inspired AA. And then like years later, after AA had become a thing, that was when he tried LSD. And then he was trying it like intermittently. And a lot of people found out about it, and they were really upset about it. And his whole thing was like, he was actually kind of trying to encourage it and being like, you know, maybe it was for the people. So in the AA program, they, you have your own higher power. You can choose whatever higher power you want. It's not affiliated with any sort of religion. And then you can pick it. It can be a religious thing if you want it to be, but there's a lot of people that are agnostic and atheist and like believe in science that don't want to believe in like a god or a higher power or whatever. And so, and there was a lot of people that were getting sober, and this is what I was reading about. They were getting sober and just being severely depressed. They're like, I might be sober now, but I don't want to live. Like, people were drinking to feel something, drinking to hopefully die, and like now they're sober and they like thought life would be better, and it wasn't, and they weren't having these spiritual experiences that other people were having, and like they weren't able to connect. And so his suggestion was like, maybe try LSD once and like have that intention, and like you might be able to have a spiritual experience. And so that was what he was trying to like share with people, and they were like, no. And so then he like stopped taking LSD, supposedly. I don't know how often he was taking it, but it seemed like he had done it a couple of times to where people were like weirded out by it. And I could, you know, if anybody has any other like specific information about it, I would be interested to hear about it. But it seems like basically they thought it would help with the spirituality side of it. And they also thought that it could help with people who had alcohol withdrawals, like so intense that they would have the shaking and the hallucinations and stuff, which is what will essentially kill you. But let's see. Bill, the reason he took it was because he was one of those people that was super depressed. Like, I guess he did have the spiritual experience that was inspired by belladonna. In the book, it talks about somebody coming to him and sharing their own spiritual experience that inspired him. And, you know, I don't know. It's all kind of hearsay because it's like forever ago. Like, I don't know exactly like what, and none of this is specifically like his words, except he wrote the book. So maybe that's more aligned, but I think the whole LSD thing is really hush hush, so it's hard to say, and I don't want to like offend anybody by like saying this is what he did necessarily. This is just like what I was reading about, but I just thought that that was like an interesting add-in. But I was reading it last night, and I was like, the author of the article that I read that was writing about it was someone who had been in a recovery program for like over 12 years and was in AA, and they were kind of on the boat that like it was okay to do psychedelics here and there because they were also one of those people that was severely depressed, and like they couldn't find a connection with a spirit that aligned with them, and so they were someone that did it, but they weren't the type to like just do it all the time. It was like I'm gonna do this for this specific experience. But AA can be pretty intense. Like back in the day, you couldn't take medication for like depression or like, they even like old timer AA people were like pretty strict. They'd be like, you can't like no ibuprofen, like nothing, like
Wow.
like very, very strict. Like no, just you are not to be administering yourself anything. Essentially, therapy, no. Psychiatrist, no. Like it was very much like straight edge as fuck. So now it's not so much that way. There are people that still think that way, but I think most people understand that, like, you know, if a doctor prescribes you medication, typically most of the time it's okay. But I think once you start getting into other forms of recovery with different substances, it can get tricky because you can go to your doctor and find a sketchy one to prescribe you something that isn't good for you. So anyways, that is the interesting story about that.
Well, that's a fascinating story.
Yeah. This was a quote that I saw that someone, I think, from this experiment wrote about. It says, Bill did not see any conflict between science and medicine and religion. He thought ego was a necessary barrier between the human and the infinite, but when something caused it to give way temporarily, a mystical experience could result. After the experience, the ego that reasserts itself has a profound sense of its own and the world's spiritual essence. This is why the experience is transformational.
Yeah, I think some of what you just shared is a step towards like a wise understanding, you know, to say things like, oh, maybe you could try LSD once if nothing else is working. Or saying, yeah, well, we'll see what happens. You know what I mean? To be open. But nothing more than that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, like, it's really a case by case situation because, like, like people like me could just go and take acid and shrooms all the time, and like it probably is unnecessary. Like, I am in a position where I could probably heal a different way. You know, I could go take a trip. I could go to, like, have these different experiences. But there are maybe there is a certain case where there's a person that is literally so debilitatingly depressed that, like, a little hit of acid might change their life just a little bit, you know? So it's hard to say.
Yeah. You know, something that was lighting up in my brain was like, so you say, what was the name of the founder? Bill
Wilson.
You know, there are a lot of similar figures like him.
I think Bill Wilson. Bill W.
Like wise men and women in the history who did play with psychedelics or did play with substances. Like famously, a lot of historians, it's a common historical case that Plato probably did psychedelics back in ancient Greece.
What kind?
I mean, it's just, there's just such strong evidence. It's a pretty mainstream idea.
Ancient psychedelics.
Yeah,
what
bro.
was it? Shrooms?
What do they see? I'm not good with like these hard facts.
That's okay. I was just curious because I'm like, that's long ago. What kind of psychedelics were there?
I should polish my act if I'm going to be on more podcasts.
No, it's okay. I
think they're called the Mycenaean Mysteries. So in ancient Greece, once a year they'd gather for this like spiritual cult celebration, where for 3 days there's just like kind of like dancing and doing all these things, arriving in ecstasy and having all these powerful spiritual experiences, and it kind of like a rave.
Yeah.
And Plato would go to these. It's like pretty established. And I mean, when you listen to that, it's like, oh, come on, we all know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And so a lot of people think Plato's doing it. Freud, in his like journals and notes, he did a lot of cocaine. And he would yeah, he would prescribe it to people, thinking it would help them.
Yeah.
But you know, the interesting thing is for Plato and the founder of AA and Freud, substances were never part of their main message by the end.
Yeah.
If you go on Wikipedia, it doesn't say Plato recommended psychedelics. It doesn't say Freud recommended cocaine. At least not in like the intro.
Right. They recommend the spiritual experience, and that could be a catalyst to it.
Yes, they always recommend a new idea, you know, or an idea that brings us back to a true sense of self.
I like that.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like substances, if they ever led anywhere, they become such a minor part of the story.
Yeah. It's so interesting because then you have people like me that have like substance abuse disorder, and like it's such a tricky place. Like I have friends that are in sobriety and they like started out their sober journey like by taking shrooms. They're like, I did one shroom trip to like get sober, and like it's just when you're someone like me versus just a normal person that doesn't have a substance abuse problem, it becomes such this like tricky situation because you're like, How is that supposed to bring me back around to this?
Yeah. What would they call it in psychoanalysis? They would call it a symptom transference.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the word they would use for it. Where that's the phrase they would use for it, where you have one addiction and you just replace it with another addiction.
Yeah. The life of an addict.
It's tricky. Yeah.
It is, because then you can like switch on to something else. That's totally not even a substance. You know, it could just be like being busy all the time.
Yeah, it could be a habit.
Like
did you watch Get Him to the Greek?
Yes.
Yeah, where Russell Brand's wife is like, and then he was doing fucking yoga for 8 hours a day, and it was fucking mental.
I love that movie. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen it in so long.
Oh, that's such a good movie, and it's very relevant because it's about substance abuse.
Oh my gosh, I have like the album Infant Sorrow.
Yes.
On my phone.
Inside of you.
No, my favorite one was Will you come for my bangers?
Yeah.
My beans and mash.
I don't know what it is. I don't know why that's not like celebrated, like Citizen Kane or like freaking like 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's like one of the best movies I've ever seen.
It's
you know,
so good. I saw it in theaters, and I was like way
Oh
too
my
young
gosh,
to be seeing that in theaters. I was like a child, but
did your dad take you?
Yeah, he did.
Dude, your dad's so cool.
He's the best.
Dude,
I love him.
that's one of those movies I revisit it like once every 3 years. I'm like, yeah, I feel wiser and I feel like I understand this movie better.
I need to watch it.
Oh my gosh.
Should we watch it?
We should watch
Okay.
that movie.
That's like a great way to end this.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Do you have anything else that you want to add?
Well, actually, I think this was fun.
This was really good.
I feel like I shared controversial ideas. I think that you really pushed me. And it was just amazing that we could focus on a topic for like 40 to 50 minutes.
It was really hard for me there at the beginning. I was like, what I say?
yeah. And we dug up stories that kept getting more interesting. And
I agree.
I learned things about myself. I learned how unpolished my line of thinking can be, you know?
Me too, but that's the thing. I come prepared with all these notes, and then I'm like, brain fart.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. And I think that you definitely like opened some things up for me because it was so interesting. Like literally, like I was saying, just last night, I'm like reading this stuff and I'm like over here every day doing a practice to remain sober and like abstain from all substances and whatever. And then I was like reading this person talking about doing LSD as a way to keep you sober, which I was totally missing the point because like you said, these people, they're not saying go do psychedelics. They're saying get a spiritual experience. And like, if you need, use LSD or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm having a spiritual experience and my addict brain is like, use this. And then you just kind of like flicked it into my brain like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we had this dialogue.
I am too.
Yeah.
I do want to say, I wrote a bunch of stuff about peyote, mescaline, San Pedro. I don't want to read all of that. I got some information about shrooms, acid. I think when it comes to, and DMT, first of all, scares me because it's like the chemical that's released when you die.
It scares me too. Yeah. Have you ever seen Enter the Void?
No.
It's a movie and then they do DMT.
Actually, it sounds familiar. I think I might have.
It's a scary movie.
Yeah, actually, no, I have. Oh my God. Yeah, I must have. I think I was fucked up when I watched it though.
Yeah, it's like they're in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And
oh my God.
They don't make DMT look fun. I mean, they make it look beautiful, but in like this sublime, horrifying way.
In a terrifying way.
Like Frankenstein or something.
Probably the point.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
It's called Enter the Void.
I think DMT is cool. Like, I won't lie. Like, I had times where I was like, oh, I wish I could do that. And I think there's a reason that the universe never put it into my hands. But I think stuff like, that's not something I think I would want to do now because I feel like that's something that you're just supposed to experience like when you die because that's
crazy. That's true? Like our bodies can naturally produce it?
So I actually do have a little stat about it.
Now's the time where I'm like, I want to hear more facts.
Yeah, so I'm not I think it's like still not entirely unknown, but like my understanding from what I've been told by people is that that's the chemical that's released when you die is DMT.
Whoa.
So it's like, that's why a lot of people don't like to fuck with it because they're like, that's something you should only see when you're dying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this says that the most compelling fact about this highly psychoactive substance is that it stands out, blah, 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 but it is one of the only ones that's naturally found and produced in the human body. And this has great implications for its use in the treatment of substance abuse, addiction, other psychological maladies. And then this was interesting. So Dr. Rick Strassman, the world's leading researcher on DMT, hypothesized that the biological production of DMT takes place in the pineal gland, which is like, the spirit, the third eye.
Yeah. Rene Descartes said that was the seat of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it would make sense, but it's like, I don't think we like entirely know exactly, but, this is called the third eye. Many religions teach this is the seat of the soul, the gateway between normal consciousness and divine consciousness. So while DMT production in the pineal gland is only a theory, it's backed by the fact that researchers in recent years have found DMT in the pineal gland of rodents. And most of the enzymes needed to produce DMT are in the pineal gland. And they theorize that the function of DMT in the brain may be related to the concepts of dark matter and parallel universes in physics.
Well, I guess that makes sense. I mean, if you have neurotransmitters that can receive DMT, that must mean your body, like, physically is aware of the existence of DMT. You know what I mean? It's like if there's a dustpan lying around, there must be a broom.
Right. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, that one was the one that I thought was super interesting because I didn't know that. I just knew that DMT was like the one that people are always like hyped up about, which is why ayahuasca having DMT is like the main thing. It makes sense to me. I don't know. I don't want to ever discredit any sort of like indigenous practice of using like ayahuasca or peyote, mescaline, and San Pedro are also used typically by Native American and indigenous tribes. And I don't know. I just think the whole process is very interesting. Yeah, because I'm not going to sit here and be like, that's not healing, because I think it's healing. Like I'm one of those people that's like, I want to go do ayahuasca in the woods. Like I think I would probably like to do that because like, why not? Like, why not? But I don't think it would be like a necessity. You know what I mean? Like, I think it would just be something that I'd be like interested in doing.
Yeah, I think if the intention is openness, that's different than the intention of wanting something.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Like, and the thing that's interesting about peyote is that they use it for ailments in toothache, pain in childbirth, fever, breast pain, skin diseases, rheumatism, diabetes, colds, blindness, and there's also it increases the growth hormones and has been shown in research studies to increase immune response to cancerous tumors.
Wow.
So there are some like actual physical healing, and I think that's what a lot of these things like. I think maybe we didn't even talk about the distinction between physical healing and spiritual healing this whole time.
I could talk my butt off about that.
Yeah, because like I think a lot of this scientific stuff that I was seeing was talking about like things like that are actually used in healing ceremonies and shamanic ceremonies that indigenous people use. A lot of the times they were like not just for the physical ailments, like also spiritual malady, but there are like evidence for these things being physically healing, and then the spiritual healing is kind of like up for debate.
Did you know that LSD was originally the lab that created LSD was looking for an asthma medication?
Asthma?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Like very specifically.
I don't know. Have you? Okay, so when you did MDMA, did you suddenly feel like you could hear everything clearer?
No, I could feel everything more clearly, like in a tactile way, like the music just like thumped me more.
Yeah.
Actually, everything felt more far away, but not because of the MDMA. It was just everything had always been far away from me because I was a very insular person, and I just noticed how everything felt.
See, the reason I asked that was because when you said the LSD and acid thing, I was like, I wonder, like, I feel like you can always like breathe clearer and like see clearer and stuff
on
like
LSD,
that.
yes, yeah.
So that makes sense to me. But the reason I asked about the MDMA is because I have dysfunctional eustachian tubes in my ears, and I have also seen there's been research in MDMA being used in the treatment of tinnitus, like the ear issue from like loud sounds. And so when I would take it, I would always know that I was like on the come up because I could like my ear issue would be like resolved.
Yeah,
that's
mind blowing.
Eustachian tubes would like open, and I could hear so much clearer, and I would know that I was like about to like start rolling because of that.
Yeah.
And then I started researching it, and I saw that they were using it in tinnitus, which isn't the same thing, but it's interesting that like
that's beautiful.
The ear situation.
Yeah. that gives me so much like optimism, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like maybe even if we don't end up like, we're in this era of like psychedelics are healing, and I'm not going to sit here and say I don't think that they are, because I do think that they can be. I don't think that it's necessarily like the thing that will fucking fix you, right? But I think that it can be a tool, a catalyst, something in your toolbox. Doesn't have to be what you use. But even if, it doesn't end up being a spiritual healing, let's be excited that maybe it could be a physical healing,
Yeah.
Maybe that's my conclusion on that.
Yeah, I will share that on LSD, I rarely ever have a problem with asthma.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, it's surprising who I am on LSD. I'm like a male version of Dora the Explorer. I'm like, let's fucking go.
Why does that like make sense? That's so funny.
I think there is some of that in sober Jason Chen, partly because of all the work I've done to discover my true self. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. But I would also say, I'll circle back to like a perspective I've shared before. You can always meditate, find a new circle of friends, maybe go travel in a different place with a different culture. That will also have physical healing properties. You'll come back maybe stronger. I don't know.
Stronger sense of self too. You'll trust yourself a lot more.
Yeah. Or just stronger. Like you might come back fucking jacked.
Yeah, maybe you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think some parting advice from me is that if you're going to use, please use responsibly. Do research before you take way too much Molly one weekend, and look into set and setting, look into where you're getting your items from. Maybe look, I know there's some substances that you can take where like maybe the things that you eat before and after and the supplements that you can take can really make it a much more easy experience for you. And this is just for anyone listening. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to do things. I'm a very big believer in harm reduction too. So just, there are resources out there. You can get test kits. You can get test kits for everything. You can get a test kit for LSD. You can get test kits for all sorts of weird things that I didn't think that you could test. And you can get it for kind of the low. Like if you're spending money on drugs, you can spend $125 to get reagents that will test anything. And I would recommend it. I think I got mine from dancesafe.org maybe. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. And then also just keep an open mind. Like if you'd asked me 2 months ago if I was going to be praying every day, I would say no. And I pray every day now. And I feel like literally my life is changing. So that is healing in its own. So just, drugs don't have to be the only way, but they can be fun.
That's a wholesome way to conclude.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to add? You want to plug anything like your blog or?
Yeah. So I write poetry, and I write music. You can follow what I'm doing on my Instagram, TrubyJ. It's TROUBIEJAY.
Is it an I?
Yeah, there's an I in it.
I thought it was Trouble J.
Oh, whoa.
And I thought that was so sick.
I guess that's like kind of why I thought it was fun. It suggests the word trouble. It makes it a bit edgy.
And you're like the farthest thing from
I'm like not troublesome
That's why
at
I thought
all.
it was funny. Because I was like, Trouble J, okay.
Yeah. But I was thinking the word troubadour, but it's too big of a word. It's kind of clunky, so I thought it'd be cooler if I made it Truby.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. You guys know where to find me. Make sure that you're subscribing on the YouTube at Professional Skepticism Podcast on YouTube, or you can type in youtube.com/@ProfSkepPodcast. You can sign up to be a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/ProfSkepPodcast. There's 4 tiers: the supportive skeptic, the suspicious skeptic, the professional skeptic, and the sexy skeptic. And you can get merch and like extra episodes, which they're on their way. And you can buy merch at ProfSkepPodcast.BigCartel or BigCartel.ProfSkepPodcast.com. It's in the link in my bio. You can also follow me at ProfSkepPodcast on Instagram and Twitter. And we have a website, ProfSkepPodcast.com. And I think that's it. And feel free to DM me in the meantime. I love you so much. I love you so much. Stay sus, skeptics. Mwah!
Woo!